Injuries have officially become the main character of this football season, and it is happening again, right on schedule, like clockwork nobody asked for. This isn't just a Washington problem either. This is happening across the entire league right now. But there is one name sitting at the center of it all for the Commanders that has fans genuinely on edge. And it's time to talk through exactly why. Let's set the scene. It's the middle of August. Preseason game number 1 is officially in the books, and true to form, the biggest storyline coming out of it isn't a stat line or a highlight, it's an injury report. And once again, it's a long one. Let's start with the name generating the most anxiety across the fan base right now, second-year cornerback Trey Amos. This situation is genuinely concerning, and here's why. Amos was a second-round pick a year ago, and the reason he fell to that second round in the first place rather than going in round 1 was directly tied to injury concerns that followed him out of college. Fast forward to year 2 of his career, and while rehabbing a fractured fibula, he's now dealing with soft tissue soreness, and on top of that, ankle soreness. And look, soreness happens to every player in the league at some point. But when you stack soreness on top of a foot and ankle that's already had real structural damage, it starts to paint a picture that feels like more than just normal wear and tear. Here's the part that should really worry you if you're a fan trying to project this roster forward. Trey Amos has been to fewer full, padded practices this entire offseason than plenty of fans who've simply shown up to watch training camp in person. Think about that for a second. We genuinely do not know what this player looks like within this new defensive scheme. Not what he looks like performing well in it, not what he looks like struggling in it, just what he looks like in it, period. He's a complete unknown at this point, wrapped in a very talented, very physically gifted package. Nobody is questioning his ceiling. He's got legitimate size, length, and speed, the kind of translatable NFL cornerback traits scouts drool over. But none of that matters if the player attached to those traits can't actually stay on a football field. So what happens if Trey Amos ends up missing real time once the regular season begins? The most obvious contingency plan involves shuffling the pieces already in the room, sliding one corner outside, keeping another corner working exclusively on the outside, and filling the slot from within. But there's a real appetite among plenty of fans, and it's hard to argue with the logic, for the front office to go out and add a proven, established veteran presence at cornerback before the season kicks off. Someone who can plug into that slot role with total confidence rather than relying entirely on unproven depth. There's a well-known veteran slot corner sitting out there on the open market right now who fits that exact profile. A guy in his 30s with a strong track record and a real knack for creating turnovers. Whether the front office pulls that trigger remains to be seen. But it's a conversation worth having, especially with training camp winding down and the clock ticking toward week 1. Now let's move to the quarterback room, because this story keeps getting more complicated by the day. Backup quarterback Marcus Mariota is dealing with a sprained MCL that is going to keep him out for the rest of the preseason, which means significantly more preseason reps are headed toward the other arms in that room over these next couple of weeks. And here's a question that's genuinely worth asking out loud. With the primary backup sidelined and no clear certainty about whether he'll be fully ready to go by week 1, does that change the calculus at all on how much the team wants to expose their franchise quarterback to during these remaining exhibition games? It's a real conversation. You don't want to be caught in a situation where your starter gets banged up in a meaningless preseason snap while your top backup is also unavailable. That's the kind of worst-case scenario front offices actively try to avoid, and it might mean we see significantly less of the starting quarterback on the field over these next couple of preseason games than originally planned. Moving over to the running back room, which has quietly become one of the most chaotic position groups on the entire roster. Veteran running back Jeremy McNichols is dealing with a quad injury that appears more serious than initially suggested, and defensive lineman Tim Settle is also banged up. To help stabilize things in the backfield, the team brought in a familiar face, signing veteran running back Craig Reynolds, who actually spent time with this franchise years ago before building a career elsewhere, most notably picking up real experience inside a Ben Johnson-style offensive system. That background matters because it means he arrives already speaking the same offensive language this coaching staff is currently installing, which is valuable in the short term even if he's ultimately more of a camp body than a lock for the 53-man roster. But here's the real headline buried inside all of this bad injury news. Every single time one of these backfield injuries piles up, it opens the door a little wider for undrafted rookie running back Robert Henry Jr., who was already turning heads with a standout performance in the preseason opener. If you're wearing his jersey right now, you have to see this as an incredible opportunity. Nobody wants to see a teammate go down, but this is exactly the kind of break that turns undrafted long shots into legitimate roster locks. Thankfully, it's not all bad news on the injury front. Starting center Nick Allegretti is officially back on the practice field after missing most of camp, and that is a massive development for an offensive line that badly needs stability up front. Tight end John Bates is also set to return to practice this week after battling through his own injury absence, which should shake up a tight end room that has genuinely been making plays and getting real involved in this offense throughout camp. Getting two starters back at once is a real bright spot in an otherwise rough stretch of injury news, and it can't be overstated how much that stability matters heading into the stretch run of camp. Now let's shift gears completely, because there's a storyline worth revisiting that has absolutely nothing to do with this year's roster and everything to do with a pattern that has haunted this franchise for decades: Washington's brutal, borderline unbelievable history in the second round of the NFL Draft. This is not an exaggeration or an emotional overreaction. This is a documented 3-decade pattern of futility that deserves to be laid out in full, because once you see the list, you understand exactly why current second-round cornerback Trey Amos remains such a nerve-wracking wild card rather than a settled sure thing. Let's start with the active roster and work backward through history. Trey Amos himself is currently a complete unknown, too injured and too unproven to grade one way or the other just yet. Defensive tackle Jairson Newton, still commonly known by his college nickname Johnny, is entering year 3 and has been a genuine disappointment so far. The kind of player who badly needs a defining season to change the trajectory of his early career. Cornerback Mike Sainristil is a mixed bag, someone whose flashes look every bit like a legitimate NFL cornerback, and whose rougher moments look like a player who might not have that long-term future at all, but he's also proven to be a legitimate turnover machine. So he doesn't get filed as an outright miss. Tight end Ben Sinnott appears to finally be breaking out in year 3, getting real involved in an offense that's spreading targets to every tight end on the roster, but up to this point his career has mostly been a miss. Safety Quan Martin is fighting for his football life in a crowded free safety competition. A pre-Adam Peters draft selection, who hasn't been a clean miss, but hasn't exactly locked down a starting job either. And then finally, offensive lineman Sam Cosmi checks in as an unquestioned hit, even though the story behind that pick has its own twist, because Washington actually drafted him to play offensive tackle, only to realize almost immediately that his future was on the interior. And the coaching staff made that positional switch within his very first few practices as a rookie. So, out of the most recent handful of second-round selections, you get exactly one clean, unquestioned hit. That's the modern era. Now let's go back further, because the history gets significantly darker. Running back Darius Geis remains one of the most painful what-if stories in recent franchise memory. a player who simply could never stay healthy long enough to show what he was capable of on the field, and who ultimately became more of a beloved figure within the fan base's social circles than an actual contributor between the lines. Defensive end Brian Anderson was a well-regarded prospect on paper who never developed the physical profile teams typically look for at that position. A swing-and-miss pick that never really got off the ground. Safety Sua Cravens flashed real electric talent early, including a diving interception that fans still remember fondly. But he ultimately walked away from football entirely just 2 years into his rookie contract, closing out his time with the franchise in bizarre fashion rather than blossoming into the star many envisioned. Defensive end Preston Smith stands out as a genuine hit from this stretch, developing into a legitimate, long-tenured starter in this league. Even if the franchise ultimately let him walk in free agency rather than retaining him long-term. Defensive end Trent Murphy, taken around that same era, did not pan out. Cornerback David Amerson arrived with sky-high expectations after an outrageous college interception total, and while there were flashes, it never fully translated at the next level. Defensive lineman Jarvis Jenkins barely registers as a memorable NFL contributor at all. And then there's the infamous 2006 draft class, which somehow burned 3 separate second-round picks on offensive skill position players, tight end Fred Davis, wide receiver Devin Thomas, and wide receiver Malcolm Kelly, and saw all 3 fail to become anything close to consistent difference makers. Fred Davis flashed real talent in stretches and remains the most talented of that trio, but his time in Washington is remembered just as much for reportedly showing up late to the start of training camp after oversleeping as it is for anything he did on the field. Keep going back and you'll find linebacker Rocky McIntosh, who at least became a long-term starter, which counts as a modest win. Wide receiver Taylor Jacobs was a well-documented miss. Running back Liddell Betts had a genuinely solid, productive career. And cornerback Fred Smoot was excellent early in his rookie deal, racking up a strong interception total and giving fans a real reason to believe the franchise had finally cracked the code on second-round talent evaluation. But notice how far back you have to travel in franchise history to find that consistent run of hits. We're talking multiple decades removed from today's roster. Since then, it's been an overwhelming string of injuries, unmet expectations, and players who simply never developed into what their draft slots suggested they should become. This is not a franchise that has proven it can reliably turn a second-round selection into difference-making, long-term talent, and that history is exactly why every single second-round prospect on this current roster gets evaluated with a slightly more skeptical, wait-and-see lens than fans of other franchises might apply to their own. Now, shifting back to the present day, there's one more storyline that deserves real attention, and it's an ugly one. The sheer volume of public mockery currently being aimed at franchise quarterback Jayden Daniels. This isn't just random trolls on social media anymore either. Professional organizations across completely unrelated corners of the sports and entertainment world have been taking public shots at him, piling on jokes tied to an ongoing off-field jersey number controversy that has nothing to do with his actual play on the football field. It has reached a genuinely surprising scale, the kind of pile-on that's rarely seen directed at a young franchise quarterback heading into just his 3rd professional season. Here's the important context, though. By every indication, Jayden Daniels himself remains completely locked in on football, entirely uninterested in engaging with any of this noise personally. He is not the one fanning these flames. This appears to be almost entirely a background business matter being handled by his representation and family, running on a track that has nothing to do with what's actually happening at practice in Ashburn. If there's a critique worth making here, it's not really about Daniels at all. It's a gentle suggestion to whoever is managing his business affairs behind the scenes. Find a way to keep matters like this contained and out of the spotlight during the heart of football season. Because right now, it's creating an unnecessary distraction swirling around a player who has more than earned the benefit of the doubt through his actual performance on the field. And speaking of unearned criticism, let's put a stop to one more overreaction that's been floating around since the preseason opener, the pile-on directed at rookie linebacker Sonny Styles after his first career NFL action. Yes, he's still raw at the position, and that tracks, given he's only been playing linebacker full-time for a few years now, having transitioned into the role relatively recently in his development. He's going to lean on pure athleticism until the game genuinely slows down for him mentally, and that is completely normal for a rookie linebacker making his professional debut. When you actually watch how fluidly he moves out there and compare it to what's around him at the position, there is real reason for optimism, not panic. But that's the nature of preseason football discourse now. Everyone is racing to stake a claim online, either canonizing a rookie as a future Hall of Famer or writing them off as an outright bust, all based on a small handful of snaps in a meaningless exhibition game. It is a wildly premature exercise, and it happens every single year to nearly every single rookie, regardless of how that career actually plays out over time. So where does all of this leave the Commanders heading into the second preseason game and the stretch run toward the regular season? A backup quarterback sidelined. A promising but unproven cornerback still shrouded in complete mystery. A running back room getting shuffled by injury. Some encouraging returns up front. A franchise quarterback absorbing public noise he did nothing to invite. And a defensive rookie linebacker getting buried by overreactions after a single preseason outing. It's a lot to track, and it's still only the middle of August. But amid all of that chaos, there's still real reason for optimism. The defensive identity being built under this new coordinator has flashed real teeth already this preseason across the league. And there's a growing belief that what fans have seen so far barely scratches the surface of what this unit is capable of once the games start counting for real. Injuries and distractions are part of every single season in this league. What matters most is how a team manages to navigate through them. So here's what I want to know from all of you. How worried are you, on a scale that matters to you, about the Trey Amos situation heading into Week 1? And do you think Washington needs to go out and add proven veteran depth at cornerback before this roster gets locked in? Sound off down in the comments and let me know exactly where your concern level sits right now. If this breakdown helped you make sense of everything swirling around this team right now, do me a favor and smash that like button. And make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss a single update as this roster continues to take shape heading into Week 1. Thanks for riding with me through all of this, and I will catch you in the next one.